Hello, and welcome to Owlvideogaming. In episode 8, I said that I was going to decide what to do with the series of videos I was making before I went silent for a year. I was going through my consoles in chronological order and talking about them, giving some background information, and playing a game on them. So I said that I might continue it, I might restart it, or I might scrap it altogether. So I've decided to restart it. I'll be again going through my consoles in chronological order, but I'm going to be doing it differently this time. While before I talked a bit about the console, giving mostly background information, and then went on to play a game on the console which took up most of the video, this time I'm going to be focusing almost entirely on the console. I'll be focusing a little less on the background information and more on the actual console unit, what the controllers are like, and so on and so forth. So, today I'm going to be talking about the Atari 2600. The Atari 2600 was originally released as the Atari VCS, or Video Computer System, in 1977. It was then renamed to what it is commonly known as nowadays, to the Atari 2600 in 1982 because of the launch of the Atari 5200. It is probably the first video game console as we know them today. There were, of course, predecessors such as the Magnavox Odyssey, but the Odyssey had only a few games, all packaged with the console, that were all very similar. They operated on the same basic principles, and they used overlays on the screen, and the graphics were literally just white squares or rectangles. So, the Atari 2600 was really the first of its kind. Unlike just about every console after it, such as the NES and onwards, up to nowadays with the Wii U, PlayStation 4 and Xbox One, it doesn't focus on creating its own gaming experience with its own franchises and so on and so forth, but rather it was created to emulate the arcade experience, to bring it home, which is reflected in the controls. So a large quantity of its games were arcade ports. The Atari 2600 is the home video game console that was on the market the longest of any home video game console. It was in fact competing with the NES in 1985, after being reinvigorated after the video game crash. So, onto the console. So, here's the console, 2 controllers, and a game cartridge. So, this is the Atari 2600 Junior, a slimmer redesign of the original. So, on the front, there's the cartridge port and 4 switches. An on-off switch, a switch for your TV type, color and black and white. There's a select switch, and, well, it's a button, and there's a reset button. At the back here, there's the 2 controller ports, and here the controllers are identified as the left controller and the right controller, rather than player 1 and player 2, and there's another 2 switches for the difficulty for each player. There's also a port for the power cable and for the video cable. Now, the controllers. Neither of these are the original controller that came with the system. This is a controller that was with the system when I bought it, but it doesn't work, so this is the one I got to replace it. It cost me £5. So these are both third-party controllers. The original controller was simpler. It had a cylindrical stick and 1 button. And a lot of controllers had multiple buttons, a lot of third-party controllers, but they weren't really necessary. So the controller was made to emulate simple arcade controls, and it was really all that was necessary for most of the games. So, the cartridges. This is a Defender 2 cartridge, and the cartridges were one of the main reasons for the Atari 2600's success, because unlike its predecessors, there were a lot of games available separately. to be bought for the system. Unfortunately, this was also part of its downfall, because there were a lot of cheaply made games that were just hurriedly made by people wanting to get in on the video game craze. And this led people to no longer trust the Atari 2600, and people just stopped buying games and systems, which led to the video game crash. So, the controllers. As I said before, neither of these is an original controller that came with the system. They're both third party. So this one's broken, so I'm going to talk about this one. This is similar enough to the original. It has an 8-way stick, digital. Now, the original didn't click, and the original had a button in the top left over here. This instead has a button here and a button here, but they both serve the same function in most games. Now, interestingly, the controller port is the same as that on a Sega Mega Drive or a Master System, so you can actually use the controllers from those systems on this, and they work. Now, the graphics on the system and the sound effects, a lot of people nowadays would describe them as very crude, but of course others will look at them nostalgically. I personally think that they're very good graphics because they're the best that could be done at the time. They're certainly better than the competition's graphics. So now I'll show you a bit of gameplay to talk about the graphics and what it was like. So, I'm playing Defender 2. Let's start. So, the graphics, as you can see, are, by mod standards, extremely primitive. But, back at the height of the Atari 2600's popularity, they were the very best around, and they were amazing. They were good enough to emulate the arcade. And they were better than the competitions. Also, graphics, the actual detail and quality of the graphics wasn't nearly as important back then as it is nowadays. Here it was more important to just vaguely represent what is supposed to be on the screen and let your imagination do the rest, unlike nowadays. And remember, the Atari's games were very arcade-oriented, so these were all the graphics that they needed. So, that's it really. So, that was the Atari 2600. It was the first of its kind, really, the first of the home video game consoles as we know them today. It was immensely popular, but that, unfortunately, was what led to actually two very big games that led to the downfall of the Atari 2600 were E.T. and Pac-Man. They were both very anticipated games, and when they were released, they were very disappointing. Actually, Atari was so confident that Pac-Man would be extremely successful that they actually made more Pac-Man cartridges than they had already sold Atari consoles, which was ridiculous. So, because of the bad games, people stopped trusting Atari, stopped buying games, and stopped buying consoles, which led to the video game crash. So, the Atari's immense success was also its greatest weakness. So this was an instrumental part in the rise of video games and led us to the consoles that we have today. But next we're going to be talking about the NES, which single-handedly brought back the video game market. And it is also thanks to that that we have the consoles and games that we do today. So thanks for watching, like and subscribe if you feel like it, and goodbye.